Well everyone, let's go and take a look at the Blackberry Passport and see how this particular phone is holding up in the later part of 2024. Now, the big thing here to keep in mind is that this phone came out 10 years ago, and I probably would not recommend any single person to go and buy this phone anymore, but it's still very fun to go ahead and see it and kind of see how it holds up in a lot of different ways. Now, number one, it's always important to buy a phone that's still supported with software, and this phone hasn't gotten a software update in many years. So because of that, I would not recommend anyone to buy a phone like this. I would recommend you to buy a phone, probably just not this phone. Now, with many Blackberries, this thing had a keyboard on the front, and that was the coolest thing going on for this phone. It was such a novelty, and I really did enjoy having keyboards like this, but I'm glad we switched over to full screen designs. So this thing, you were getting a 4.5-inch display on the top, and then that standard keyboard with the fingerprint sensor in the bottom. Now, this is the problem with this phone. A lot of applications never really adapted to that 4.5-inch design, so because of that, you're kind of stuck in the situation where a phone like this isn't really going to be a good idea if you're trying to, download applications that are native to this type of 1440p by 1440p type of design. Not a lot of applications are, adapted to this display. Now, you can still use those applications on there, but they're just not going to look as nice, right? That's just kind of what just ended up happening with this phone. Compared to a lot of phones that we're getting nowadays though, this phone, beyond than just the keyboard, has an IPS LCD panel. Most phones have OLED, we have high refresh rates, this one is stuck at 60, and we have high brightness. This one is probably not that bright either. So from that standpoint, this phone is kind of outdated when it comes down to those particular things as well. On the bottom, you're getting a micro USB port, which is pretty outdated, but you are getting a headphone jack on this phone and a micro SD card slot. So those things are kind of nice to have inside of this type of device. So if you are going to go through and pick up a phone, it is actually nice to have a micro SD card slot. I'll give this phone that. But as you probably would have imagined, it's still not a phone I'd recommend anyone to buy, just because it really isn't that great of a device when it comes down to it. But it was a really good phone when it first came out. On the back side, you're getting this kind of like plastic back with a removable top. You're getting a single camera setup. And that's kind of it, right? There's not really anything else like super insane on the backside or on the sides, but the front of this phone, like if you pull this phone out today, you would be probably getting a lot of looks just because this is one of those phones that just looks so random. So I think that was an interesting thing. Now, one of the problems, like I mentioned before, that we're experiencing with this phone now is that it's not really getting any more software updates. And there's just not really a big reason to go ahead and buy phones if they're already outdated with software. And as I mentioned before, that is essentially the problem that you're going to be getting with this type of device, right? Like, why buy a phone like this if it's already going to be outdated with software? And that is essentially what's going on here. So I would way rather you go ahead and buy a phone that is still supported with software. Things like the Samsung Galaxy S24, the Google Pixel 9, Google Pixel 8, those types of phones, the iPhone 16, those devices are still supported with software and are still going to be getting software updates, where this phone is no longer getting those things. So I do think this in and of itself is another very big thing that's going on here. So personally for me, I think that's a very big thing, but also on top of those things, you're also getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset inside of this phone with 3 GB of RAM. Those things are also very important, right? Those are very important to have. Now, this phone is already outdated with software and the performance is already going to be outdated too, but I was glad that this thing had a Snapdragon chipset, and even 3 GB of RAM inside of a 2014 phone was kind of decent, right? So I think those things are super important to think about. Overall, I really would not recommend buying this phone anymore. I don't think it's worth buying. I think there's significantly better devices that I'd recommend buying than this thing. But I do think in a lot of ways, like, BlackBerry did a decent job during these, phones that they made, but clearly buy a phone that's still supported with software. Please do not go through and buy this device. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out, till then.